I'm here to give you an introduction into saltwater fly fishing, where you too can experience all of this. In fly fishing, many of us begin with trout fishing, and then perhaps we might move on to salmon fishing because we're looking for a larger and more powerful quarry. At this point, you should really consider making the jump into saltwater. And when I'm talking about saltwater fly fishing in this instance, I'm not talking about mullet and bass fishing around the east coast of England, which, don't get me wrong, is fantastic. I'm going to concentrate more on fly fishing in the saltwater on the salt flats. What do I mean by salt flats? Salt flats are generally found in the tropics, and we are going to be looking at areas where fish feed in anything from 2 inches to about 3.5 to 4 feet of water. And these are generally areas which are tidal, totally affected by the tides, and that predicts what species will come in and when. What we're going to do in this video is look at a few of the reasons why I love saltwater fly fishing so much, and we're going to have a brief look at the kind of gear that you might need to get into saltwater fly fishing. I think the first thing that I really love about saltwater fishing is the visual element. There is nothing quite like wading across a flat and seeing and targeting the fish you are fishing for. I think for me, in most of the arenas of fly fishing that I now do, it is this visual element that I find so totally engrossing. It's very difficult to describe the feeling that you might have as a bonefish comes tailing along the edge of a flat and you target a specific fish out of a school and you put your fly in that specific place. You are then moving your fly and you watch everything unfold, a little like a panorama in front of you. You watch that fish moving towards the fly, you watch it trying to pin it, and then you watch its reaction as you can potentially hook up to it. There's nothing quite like it, and I think of all the fly fishing I do, I think saltwater fly fishing probably puts my heart in my mouth the most. I think the next important factor, which I did touch on very briefly before, is power. A lot of us who have started trout fishing, you've done some salmon fishing, and you are really looking to see what is possible to do with a fly rod. The reason that salmon are so powerful is because they spend the majority of their life living in the salt. And the salt is not for the faint-hearted, mostly because everything is trying to eat everything. So you have to have an ability to power away from predators and also to power into prey. This makes most saltwater fish incredibly strong, especially for their size. You only have to look at bonefish for proof of that. There is a fish which, even a 1.5 to 2.5 pound fish, is quite capable of ripping 50 meters of backing off your reel in its first run. When you get onto some of the bigger species perhaps, then a lot of that turns into a serious tussle. It is going to be fairly brutal in some instances, and a lot of those battles don't always end in your favor. So you have to certainly be prepared for that, but it's the sheer power of these fish as not only when they take a fly, but also the speed with which they then run. And for those who have not tried it, it is breathtaking and it's very difficult to describe to a first timer. Let me put it like this. A salmon or a trout swimming at absolutely full pace probably is going to hit 6 or 7 miles an hour as fast as it's going. Bonefish on the flats have been clocked at over 30 miles an hour on their first and second runs. There's nothing that prepares you for that feeling as you actually essentially lose control. Most of the fly fishing we do, you're pretty much in control. Maybe not on some big salmon battles on rivers, but certainly in the salt, you are there are certain elements of that fight you are out of control and you're hanging on for dear life. And I think that is one of the key factors that makes it so incredibly exciting. I think the next thing is species variation. At the end of the day, you're in the sea. There's not just one or two species going to be knocking around you, and you have to be prepared to try and catch whatever happens to swim around the corner. It is one of the pieces of advice I give everybody who is going into the salt. Don't generally become too focused on one particular species, because what will happen then is you will target and focus that species so much that you will be oblivious to all of the other species which are around that you can catch on a fly. There are areas in the Seychelles or the Caribbean you can catch nearly over 100 species on a fly rod. All of these are exciting, all of them require different technical expertise, different fly patterns, different presentations, and quite often different rod setups. The easiest way for me to explain that perhaps is in a tidal flow. We all know that tides come in and tides come out. On the salt flats, when the tides come out, you quite often find yourself with a dry flat. There's no water on it. So as that water begins to come in and starts trickling over the flats and running along, so do the first fish which have been hanging around the edge trying to get onto the flats. You may start with your emperors and your other small species which are working their way up to get a mouthful. They feel relatively safe on the flats because of the fact that the water's too shallow for most predators to follow them, and they can actually have a time to feed. Now with the emperors, maybe the bonefish. The bonefish are quite often, certainly in the saltwater arena, one of the first fish which will come up onto the flats, and you will quite often see them nosing in. They've almost got their backs and tails out of the water as they are heading up tide and trying to get up to probably the mangrove areas where they think the feeding is going to be the most prolific. And what are they eating? All of these fish are probably living off shrimps, crustaceans, well, shrimps are crustaceans, but shrimps, small crabs, worms, all sorts of other things that they can dig out and burrow out. Or in the case of a bonefish, they literally jet water through their gills and they jet water into the mud or the mull, and then they blow away the area, and then they can see their prey which they can then pounce on. Some of these fish don't necessarily have teeth, they have crushers in the back of their throat to crush their prey. So as the bonefish come on and begin to fin around, so there's your first species which will come on to, and then after a certain amount of water is pushed, especially whether you're on neap tides or spring tides, then the predatory species start coming in behind them. They're looking for a meal, so they're quite often switched on and aggressive on an incoming tide. In the Seychelles, for example, this is quite often the trevally species, so it'll begin with the smaller trevally like the bluefins, leading up to your apex predators, your giant trevally, your sharks, and other species such as those. The giant trevally particularly will come up and start smashing into herds of bait fish, and so you have gone through this whole change while standing there. You're witnessing it. It's actually happening and unfolding. Nature is unfolding in front of you, and it's an extraordinary thing to witness. And each time you've got a different species to try and catch on a fly. So whether you're going to change from your 7-weight rig to your 11-weight rig, but it is just that variety of species which I find so incredibly exciting. And when I say it's exciting, it is almost tangible how exciting this can get. A very good example would be something like the first time you see the black sickle tail of a permit. This is an extraordinary fish. It's incredibly difficult to catch on fly. It is we have a saying in the saltwater arena of permit fever. You can get this fish under your skin. You're so desperate to catch it, and you can go years sometimes without catching a permit. But that fish, as soon as I see that tail come out of the water, I literally cannot control my legs. They begin to shake. And that's normally when all of the proficient casting goes to rats, the line gets wrapped around your neck, everything does not go according to plan, but then every so often it does. And it's for those moments that we absolutely live for. Another example which is particularly close to my heart, which is giant trevally fishing, as that is one of my true passions in the salt. And when you see the bow wave of a GT coming onto the flats, it is literally like it's a V-wake of water pushing water because the fish is too big essentially to be on the flats, and it's coming in and it's prowling. and you have to make sure that you get in front of that fish. And it's not necessarily going to be that spooky either. Sometimes you can literally run towards it, and there is nothing like that feeling of chasing down a fish. You are running through thigh-depth water to try and intercept this fish coming through, and while you're running, you're probably stripping some line off at the same time. The fly is whirling in the air, and finally you make that big heave. The fly goes in, the fly lands, and there's an explosion like someone's thrown a rock into the water, and the fish hits the fly, and then all hell breaks loose. There's water flying all over the place. The fish will then start arcing off in one direction or another, and you are there slightly bewildered and slightly thinking, what the hell is it that just happened? But it is unbelievably exciting. And although I love my trout and my salmon fishing, I don't think I've had an instance where I get that level of heart-beating, adrenaline-pumping excitement in the same way that I do with saltwater fish. Also, most of the tropics are warm. It's nice. You don't have to wear 30 layers to go outside. Most of the saltwater destinations that we fish are pretty close to the equator, and therefore they're warm. And that is a lovely thing to be doing. It's a bit different to donning your waders and getting into a cold river. You know, you can be wearing shorts and a thin shirt, and you've got the sun beating down on your back. And not only have you got the sun beating down your back, you've got the sun above you, and that is giving you a phenomenal vista most of the time. It's like someone's turned on an enormous set of lights, and you can see everything that's happening on the flats in front of you. And for those of us in the northern hemisphere that spend a large proportion of the winter wrapped up to the nines and covered in this case, in this country, miserly rain, it's a rather lovely thing to be wandering around in nice warm water and feel the sun on your back. So where can I experience this extraordinary thing that you talk of, I hear you say? There's lots of different areas that we saltwater fly fish. One of the principal areas is the Caribbean. Everything from Bermuda, the Bahamas, Cuba, Mexico, Belize, Nicaragua, Honduras, Guatemala, Costa Rica, Venezuela. All of these are phenomenal saltwater destinations. Some of the middle islands maybe not so much because they don't have these saltwater flats. So there are some to an extent in Trinidad and Tobago, but there are not particular fly fishing operations. And you have to have this flat area to concentrate on. Then we have the Indian Ocean, we have the Seychelles, we have the Maldives, we have Oman, we have Sudan. All of these places are very different in nature. Mexico, for example, predominantly marley bottoms. Great place for beginners to start saltwater fishing because it has all of the major species. You have your bonefish, your tarpon, your permit, your snook. And all of those fish are probably not going to be of a monstrous trophy size, so it allows you to find your feet, get used to that kind of saltwater environment. Then you might then move up into going to somewhere like Belize, which you are potentially fishing more of an atoll based type environment. So it's going to be hard coral flats, turtle grass flats coming over the top, white sand and palm trees. I'm getting myself excited at this point, but it's just a beautiful environment to be in. And these countries all offer a different cultural experience and a different type of fishing, which means there's lots to do, and it suits all different tastes and different price points. So being fly fishermen, obviously kit is never too far from our minds. What kind of kit do I need to go and explore these wonderful destinations that you speak of? Well, to be honest, you can get going fairly easily. Most of the heavy stillwater fishing rigs that we use for trout in this country will suffice. Normally the setup for bonefish is a 9-foot 7-weight, 9-foot 8-weight rod. We use 9 feet because firstly 9 feet is easier to travel with, 4-piece sections on an airline, and also a lot of these destinations there's no trees, so it can be quite windy, and a 9-footer is quite often easier to cut into a wind than a 9-foot 6 or a 10-foot. At a push you can certainly use them, but most of us stick with a 9-foot rod. Then you have to start thinking about other species. Am I going to tangle with some permit or some triggerfish or some bumphead parrotfish? Then you might need to step it up a little bit because a 7 or an 8 weight is not going to have the ability to control a fish of that power. A 9 weight is probably a better weapon for that and my favoured rod of choice. When you start tangling with tarpon and trevally, then you need to gear it up again. Baby tarpon, you're probably fine with a 10 weight. Jacks, you can do with a 10 weight Jack Crevalle. But once you start getting into maybe giant trevally, or you're going to look at some migratory tarpon, which can get up to 150 pounds, then you need to be looking at an 11 or a 12 weight rig. That is not an easy thing to begin to cast with. So if you are looking at your introduction to saltwater fly fishing and you're going to go on your first saltwater trip, I would recommend that you look at bone fishing. Bonefish are a phenomenal species to go and target. They're what I call an honest fish. If you put the right fly in the right place with the right cast and you do pretty much the right thing, the fish is probably going to eat it, and it's very rewarding. Whereas quite often you may make the perfect cast with the perfect fly with the perfect equipment to a permit, and it's going to take one look at it and go, no, I don't think so. So you don't want that kind of soul dashing desperation as soon as you get into this sport. I would leave that for much further along. So to begin with, concentrate on bonefish. The next most important item that you need is a reel. You need a decent reel. Most of your freshwater reels, salmon, trout reels, are not going to cut it in the salt. You need a reel which has got a phenomenal drag system on it, a proper disc drag. I prefer these days to use the large arbor reels because that gives you a much faster pace of return. And also you need a reel which is light, comparatively light, because you are going to be hefting this thing around all day. But saltwater proof is the key. You are about to move into the world's most hostile environment for equipment. Salt kills metal. So you need something which is going to be protected against that. A lot of people at this point would diverge into various other accoutrements, but I tell you what, I think the most important thing after your rod and reel is decent glasses. If you can't see the fish, you might as well not be there. Invest in a good pair of Polaroid sunglasses. If you have to wear glasses, then perhaps you might consider some prescription Polaroid glasses. One of the top brands, something like Costa or Maui Jims, those are very good brands of sunglasses, and they're a reason that their lenses are so good. They've spent a lot of time, money, effort and energy researching which lenses work best in which environments. But what colour should I wear? Well, the standard for going into a saltwater area is probably going to be amber or copper. That's going to be your baseline. That is a good lens which will do well in high light and also in low light conditions. It's a good mix. So if you're going to get one pair of glasses, I would go with something like copper or amber. If you are going to be a little bit more spoiled, like I am, I like to carry 3 different lenses. I carry a blue mirror lens, which is a grey based lens, and that is very good indeed in very harsh light conditions. These days I find that if actually I'm in an area which is too bright for quite a long period of time and I haven't worn sun, I get a headache, and that's not particularly good when you're trying to concentrate on where the fish, especially when you are really scanning and visualizing the entire time. My favorite mid-level is the green mirror, which is based on a copper lens. So I like mirror sunglasses because I find that that keeps the reflection away from my eyes, but the copper based one is the best all-round lens that I think you will get. And because, as I said, I'm spoiled, I also carry a pair of Sunrise high visibility lenses, because when all the lights go out, and it doesn't matter just because you're in the tropics, it's not going to be beautiful weather all the time. I'm afraid that is just a reality. It rains in the tropics just like it rains here. It's overcast in the tropics just like it is here. It's the weather. It's uncontrollable, and therefore you have to adapt to it. So the Sunrise glasses almost give you an unfair advantage in my opinion, because you put them on, I like them to call them my happy glasses. I put them on and suddenly it's all bright again, and I can see fish a long way away in really miserable conditions. And everybody thought that I was actually just a good fisherman, but actually it's probably just my glasses. So next I'm going to talk about the basic equipment that you might need. Well, you're going to need a box of flies. I like cheap plastic boxes. There's no point in taking aluminium nice boxes out into the salt because they will corrode and all your flies will rust. So I like clear fronted plastic boxes where I can see all the flies. I like slit foam. You just need a box of bonefish flies. And these are fairly basic. You're going to be looking at shrimp patterns predominantly and maybe a few crabs. So it's going to be things like gotchas, crazy charlies, spawning shrimps, Cuban shrimps, all pretty sort of shrimpy, to be honest. Mostly in sizes 6 through 8, maybe somewhere in the Bahamas you might be up to 2s and 4s because there are some bigger bonefish, say for example on the west side of Andros. But the predominant of the time you're going to be throwing that kind of fly. So maybe a couple of boxes of flies. For the bigger species, I carry all my flies in a fly wallet. And when I mean a fly wallet, I mean one of those wallets which contains little Ziploc bags in it. That is, for me, the most efficient method of carrying big flies, because otherwise you end up with these gigantic boxes which you can't really move around, and not particularly good for aeroplanes anyway. I can get hundreds of flies in those little Ziploc bags, and also it means that the dressings do not get crushed, so they remain nice and drawn out. I then have probably a couple of spools of tippet. If I'm going after something bigger like GTs or tarpon, I'm going to have some shock tippet in there. And by that I mean some thicker 80 to 100 pound mono, which is your standard leader. And that is not because it's going to break at 100 pound bang. It's mostly for abrasion resistance. These fish have got very toothy mouths, or in the case of tarpon, it's almost like sandpaper, and they will wear through leader very, very quickly. So you need shock tippet for that, but I digress. Then you need some tapered leaders, 2 or 3 tapered leaders, and some appropriate tippet material for bonefish, something like 12 to 15 pounds, for permit, maybe 16 to 20 pounds. Then maybe if you're going to chase some of the bigger fish like bumphead parrotfish or bigger triggerfish or something like that, then maybe 20, 25, where the fish are going to be less leader shy, but you do need a little bit of extra strength. Then you get into various leaders of building for tarpon, but I'm not going to get into that now because it would probably require an entirely different video. On top of that, every saltwater fisherman should have a pair of saltwater pliers. And I'm not just saying that because of the fact that they're really cool. It's because you need them if you're going to tie your knots correctly, especially on thicker tippet. A lot of ordinary scissors or stuff like that will not cut through thick mono. You need pliers which have got proper nippers on them. And also you need the pliers to be able to pull the knots tight. They are very, very useful. Not only that, you need them to unhook some of these species. You do not want to be putting your hand anywhere near their mouths, not if you value your fingers. Apart from that, a rain jacket. You want some kind of thin shell that you can pack away and stick into your bag, and I throw all of that these days into a waterproof fish pond sling bag. That for me has become the perfect medium of the amount of kit I want to carry. I used to carry a backpack with my own water, but that was when I was doing probably more exploratory style fishing where we knew we were going to be away from the boat for really quite a long period of time. You had to be pretty self-sufficient, and I'd carry a second rod. These days, I'm a little bit lazier, probably don't go so far away from the boat, so I just don't need all that. So I just carry something lighter. All of that about my person, and off I go and head off into the salt. But what clothing do I wear? What clothing should you wear for saltwater? You should wear something which is lightweight, comfortable, has SPF factor 50 built into it because you can get very badly burnt through t-shirts. And me being of vague Scottish extraction, have to be quite careful. So my days of coming home from saltwater fishing trips looking to look like some kind of brown Adonis, yeah, no, who am I kidding, are very, very distant. So I really don't worry about it. These days I try and cover up completely. Sun, although lovely, can also be quite damaging. So you have to make sure that you protect your skin accordingly. So starting from top to bottom, I would go with, these days, a wide brimmed hat. I've worn baseball caps for years, and I found that I was beginning to get slightly crispy ear syndrome on the top. So now I wear a wide brimmed hat, which is made of some kind of lightweight supplex material that will keep the sun out of my face, but also will protect the back of my neck and also my ears. Then you need some kind of buff, or almost like a sun balaclava kind of thing. I know you can, or you can use sun cream, but I like to have my face covered, because when you are out searching for fish for 2 or 3 hours with the glare of the water coming directly up at you, and it's about 38 degrees and there is no cloud and there is no wind, you just burn, and it doesn't matter how much sun cream you put on. So I these days will either wear a buff, or I have shirts which have a built-in sun balaclava and then a hood that goes over the top. And the sun balaclava comes all the way up underneath, over the top of my nose, underneath my glasses, over the top of my ears, and then my hat then goes on top. But there is a benefit to that, because also you have something tucked up underneath your glasses and it stops all the light reflection coming in the side of your glasses, which actually improves your vision when you are trying to spot fish. Shirts, touched on it briefly. I go with the long-sleeved Supplex t-shirt variety, although I know a lot of people who still wear the kind of traditional cotton ones with the patches on the front. I like the loose ones. They're also very quick drying. If you get wet, if you get dunked, or if you get a quick squall that comes through, they dry off really, really fast and they're very comfortable. The sun hood is quite a good idea. Then moving down onto the lower half, shorts obviously, but you can wear long trousers if you want to, depending on where you're going to be fishing. Now, a long time ago, I discovered that if you wear long trousers, which do protect your legs, as soon as you start wading, especially if you've got them tucked into your socks, you then end up with gallons of water, which you're towing around on the flats. And if you're going to wade 8 kilometers in a day, it's exhausting. So quite some time ago, I adopted the Batman-like tight escapades. So I now wear full-length Lycra tights underneath my shorts. That not only stops the dreaded chafe, but also it protects my legs entirely. And much like the wet wading in New Zealand, you then can move through the water very, very easily without all that drag, and your legs are protected. And on my feet, decent saltwater boots. Now this is really important. Depending on where you're fishing, there are areas in Belize and Mexico where you could probably get away with neoprene booties or the kind of wetsuit type boots, but a lot of areas which have got coral you really can't, because the coral will go straight through the bottom of those into your foot, and you can get all sorts of very nasty infections from having coral in your skin. So you've got to be pretty careful. So I wear proper thick boots, I wear the Sims variety, and then underneath those, a lot of people will go with some kind of old athletic sock. They put the boot on and then maybe wear a gravel guard around the top to prevent the sand getting into your boot. I wear a gravel guard and sock combination, so the two are actually stitched together. Mine are made by Sims. Wet wading sock, so you literally pop them on, you put the boot on, and then you just roll the gaiter down over the top and clip it to the front of the laces. Easy as pie, makes life dead easy. And that pretty much completes all the kind of toys and kit you require. I say require because there's lots of things you're going to want and probably think you need, but that is what you actually require to go saltwater fishing. I leave the rest to you.